The following accounts are personal recollections from two Cheyenne warriors who participated in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, also known as Custer's Last Stand. These stories, as narrated to historians in the early 20th century, provide a rare glimpse into the Cheyenne perspective of the battle. Big Beaver, a northern Cheyenne, shared his experiences in 1928 during an interview with Joseph A. Blummer at Custer Battlefield, Montana. Brave Bear, a southern Cheyenne, recounted his memories in a letter to George Hyde in 1906. These warriors' testimonies offer unique insights into the fierce conflict between the Cheyenne, Sioux, and the U.S. Army, marking a pivotal moment in Native American history. Let us now listen to their first-hand accounts of that fateful battle. Big Beaver's account of the battle, a northern Cheyenne's reminiscence of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, as narrated to Joseph A. Blummer in 1928 at Custer Battlefield, Montana. Dr. Thomas Marquise and I had conducted extensive research on the Custer and Reno engagements. Dr. Marquise had served as a doctor at Lame Deer for several years and became one of the finest sign language communicators I ever met. During his time at Lame Deer, he became familiar with several Cheyenne individuals who had participated in the Custer and Reno battles. By earning their trust, he was able to gradually learn more about the events, as these older Indians were initially fearful of government retribution if their involvement in the battles became known. Dr. Marquis and I were close friends, and he confided many things to me over time. It took him 2 years of careful conversation before he could piece together much information about the engagements. Now I will recount the story of Big Beaver as it was shared with us during the summer of 1928. Dr. Marquise and Big Beaver visited my store in Garryowen, Montana, where we spent 3 days together. Each day we walked the battlefields, and Big Beaver would recount his personal experiences of the battle, carefully distinguishing between what he had witnessed himself and what he had heard from other Indians. I will share only the details that he claimed to have seen or directly participated in. The first thing Big Beaver remembers is the arrival of the soldiers. At the time, the Indians had no method of tracking days or months like we do, so we must interpret their memories as they recall them. Word had spread that soldiers were coming to fight. Big Beaver was about 17 years old at the time and prepared to join the battle. His father told him, "Son, you're too young to fight, and there are many warriors here who will not need you." Nevertheless, Big Beaver decided to go. At that point, he had only a bow and arrows, as he had not yet acquired a rifle. He noted that many of the Indians in the battle were also without firearms. The Cheyenne camp, situated at the northern or lower end of the large Indian camp, was the closest to the battlefield. From this location, the Cheyenne warriors traveled north along the river and then eastward, moving toward Custer's forces from the north side. When Big Beaver arrived, he left his pony a short distance behind and crawled up a coulee just to the north and slightly east of where the monument now stands. He described a Sioux warrior in a war bonnet ahead of him. This Sioux would rise, fire at the soldiers on the hill where the monument is now located, then drop down to reload and crawl forward again. He repeated this several times. Big Beaver recalled being right behind the Sioux when the warrior stood up to fire again and was struck by a bullet in the forehead. Big Beaver then described the precise spot where the bullet hit the Sioux. At that moment, Big Beaver thought, "This isn't the place for me," so he turned and crawled back. He then saw a soldier rise and mount his horse. This was a member of Captain Miles Keogh's troop, or the Sorrel Horse Troop, and ride quickly eastward. This soldier was intercepted and killed by 2 Cheyenne warriors who scalped him and hung his scalp on the sagebrush. Big Beaver went over, retrieved the soldier's rifle and other items, and noted that this was the first gun he ever owned. When he returned to where other warriors were in the coulee, he saw them charging toward the hill where the monument now stands. He joined the charge, and upon reaching the top, he found that no soldiers were standing, though some were still firing from the ground or while sitting. The Indians rushed the remaining soldiers, and that was the end of the fighting at that location. However, Big Beaver mentioned that about 15 soldiers managed to rise on the western side of the battlefield, near the position of E Troop, and fled toward the river, running down the coulee. These soldiers appeared terrified, as they did not return fire, and the Indians swiftly pursued them. Big Beaver said the soldiers were out of ammunition and unable to defend themselves, so they attempted to reach the brush along the riverbank. To him, it seemed that these soldiers made a final desperate dash toward the river in a last-ditch effort to hide in the brush. I believe that these men had expended all their ammunition and were trying to escape. The markers for these fallen soldiers are the last 17 markers in the coulee to the southeast of the monument. Beyond this, Big Beaver knew little about the rest of the battlefield, as the smoke and dust were so thick that he could not see very far. By this point, the rest of the Indian forces had joined the battle, and everyone was attempting to claim something from the battlefield. On June 26th, he went up to the Reno field but did not engage, as he was unable to get close to the troops there. Brave Bear's account of the battle. A Southern Cheyenne's narrative of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. From a letter by interpreter George Bent to George Hyde, March 8, 1906. Colony, Oklahoma. Many war parties from the Cheyenne and Sioux had just returned to the villages after raids, and I was with a group that brought back a great deal of plunder. The war societies in the villages were holding scalp dances all through the night. I was near the center of the large village, dancing until dawn, before finally going to my father's lodge to sleep, as I had been awake all night. After I had rested for a while, my father woke me up and told me to get up because fighting had broken out at the upper village. He said he had my war horse and shield ready. As I stood up, I could hear the sound of gunfire in the distance. I grabbed my small sack, which contained my porcupine tail hairbrush and paints, and began to paint my face in the same design as my shield. My father then removed the black-tail deer tail from my shield, which he tied to my scalp lock as a charm meant to deflect bullets. He touched my head 4 times with the tail before securing it to my scalp lock. My father, of course, knew all the spiritual powers connected with the shield. Numerous war parties from the Cheyenne and Sioux tribes had recently returned to the villages from various raids. I was with a group that had come back with a great deal of plunder. The war societies in the villages were holding scalp dances throughout the night. I was near the center of the large village, dancing until dawn, after which I went to my father's lodge to sleep, as I had been awake all night. I had been resting for some time when my father woke me up and told me to get up. Fighting had broken out at the upper village. He told me he had my war horse and shield prepared. As I got up, I heard a lot of gunfire. I grabbed my small sack that contained my porcupine tail hairbrush and my paints. I had to paint my face in the same design as my shield. My father removed the black-tailed deer tail from my shield, which was to be tied to my scalp lock. This charm was meant to deflect bullets. He touched my head 4 times with this tail before fastening it to my scalp lock. My father, of course, knew all the spiritual powers associated with this shield. As I went out of the lodge to mount my horse, women and children ran past, telling me that soldiers were in the camp fighting. I could hear the gunfire clearly now. My father raised my shield to the sun and prayed for protection from bullets. Then he placed the shield on my right side and told me to go into battle and die, if necessary. As I made my way toward the battlefield, I encountered many women and children, mostly Sioux, who urged us to hurry, as several of us had gathered, and more warriors were arriving behind us. We were singing songs from our various warrior societies, including some death songs, as was the custom before battle. These songs are also sung when under attack or in dangerous situations. I heard much singing at Sand Creek when Chivington attacked the village. Brave Bear recalls that when he and his group arrived at the battleground, the soldiers were on foot and had their horses in the timber behind them. I ran very close to the soldiers, he says. They were firing in every direction as the Indians surrounded them on the other end of their firing line. 2 Crow scouts from Custer's unit charged towards him. He also charged at them. When he got close, both scouts dismounted and took cover behind their horses to shoot more effectively. At that moment, a large group of warriors rushed forward to strike coup on them. But Brave Bear was the first to land a blow, earning him a significant honor for being the first to strike in the Custer battle. When Brave Bear turned his attention back to the soldiers, he saw them retreating toward their horses, with Indians behind them in large numbers. By this point, the soldiers were heading quickly toward the Little Bighorn River. The most terrifying moment came when the soldiers reached the high river banks and plunged over them. The sound of their fall was like a cannon blast. It was a dreadful sight, as the banks were so high. When Brave Bear arrived at the riverbank, he saw the Indians shooting at soldiers as they emerged from the water. There was a lot of blood in the river. He counted only 7 soldiers who managed to crawl out on the other side of the Little Bighorn. The Indians on that side killed them shortly afterward, as they had lost their weapons in the water. Once across the river, Brave Bear saw 3 companies from Custer's battalion making a stand, with one company positioned on a knoll on the other side of them. He couldn't understand why the 3 companies didn't attempt to help the soldiers who had jumped off the bank, or why they didn't all cross